Do I have food in my beard? I hope I just ate lunch. I wouldn't want you to have to look at that. Anyway, I've been listening to the KubeCon. They had a media and analyst panel and announcements. It was kind of a, hey, the keynote's coming up, and these are the things we want you to pay attention to. So make sure you amplify our message clearly. Ha. The customer panel actually got interesting. They were talking to a variety of folks who are using cloud native technologies put out by the CNCF, the Cloud Native Computing Foundation. The Kubernetes is there and a ton of other projects that you've heard about in the open source world. Now, what was really interesting is the customers were talking about there was this theme that kept occurring as various questions came in, and that theme to me, you could describe it this way. It's all very hard. It's very hard to use and understand and keep up with. It is hard to secure because as people that are supporting this don't understand how it's working well enough to be able to secure it all that effectively. And then it's very hard to keep up with because things are changing. Someone made the comment that training folks in a classroom was just foolish because that training would be no good in a matter of weeks because the technology is moving so quickly. And of course, then they made the point that finding people that could even support all this cloud native stuff was really hard because just no one seems to know how to do it. So what's a company to do? And then you might ask the question, well, what's the logic here? Why in the heck would you be using all of this Cloud Native Computing Foundation technology, all these open source projects, if that's the world that you're in trying to support this complicated stuff? And the answer seems to be vendor lock-in. By golly, we avoided vendor lock-in, those evil vendors locking us in with their proprietary technology. I'm using all this open source stuff, and by golly, I've avoided vendor lock-in. Which is to me hilarious that that's the logic. If that's the ultimate reason you're using the Cloud Native Computing Foundation open source stuff. I'm a big open source fan. I use that kind of technology all the time whenever I can. There's a lot to be said for it, but you do have to pay a DIY open source software tax to use it. It's free as in money, but it's not free as in resources to be able to use it. And you're trading in one sort of lock-in, say, investing deeply in some vendor's product ecosystem for a different sort of lock-in. Being able to use that open source stuff. Maybe because you don't have a CapEx investment, it feels like, oh, I can just go and shift over to another project and use that instead. But can you really, or are you just locked into whatever software you've settled on so that now you're tied into those processes and you finally trained your people on how to use that? Shifting to a new technology is hard. So avoiding vendor lock-in, sure, that's a thing. But I think we're kidding ourselves if we think when we adopt some other technology that's open source that we haven't avoided lock-in of a different type. I think we're just trading in one type of lock-in for another because every technology that we use locks us in some way or another if we're using it deeply, if we're relying on it deeply and heavily to put our applications out there to our users. So is there a bit of idealism going on here? Does it just feel like, oh, I'm using all open source software, and so that's the right thing. I'm not married to AWS or Red Hat or Microsoft or Cisco or whoever that evil vendor is with all of that vendor proprietary lock-in technology kind of stuff. To me, the answer is really use the best thing for your business need. And the big advantage of going with a vendor solution of some kind is, hopefully, it is polished. It is well documented. You can get training for it, and it isn't changing week by week by week. So you can keep up with it, and you can make the most of that technology. Are you locked in some way that might be difficult to get out of? Possibly, but I don't think the difference between that sort of lock-in and the lock-in of using some kind of a complex pipeline you've built out of cloud native tooling is necessarily all that different when it gets down to it. And by getting down to it, I mean delivering that application. Because at some point, there's technology involved in getting that app delivered. You're locked into something, right? You're locked into something.